White man attacks black child in park. Parents left in shock. There was a scream so sharp it seemed to slice through the warm afternoon air, causing birds to scatter from the treetops in panicked flight. It erupted from the center of the park, where towering elms cast patchy shadows on green grass and families enjoyed the last vestiges of a summer day. The sun hung in a brilliant arc overhead, saturating the world in gold, yet that single cry was enough to turn the atmosphere from carefree to tense. Mothers jolted upright, fathers stopped their conversations mid-sentence, children paused in the middle of their games. For one agonizing moment, everyone stood still, hearts pounding, as if the world had momentarily stopped spinning. And then, as if on cue, people rushed toward the source. Near an old wooden bench, not far from a rusted swing set that still creaked under the weight of children, a boy lay crumpled in the grass. He was perhaps 10 or 11 years old, limbs slender and long, as though he had begun a growth spurt. His skin was a rich, dark brown, glistening with a faint sheen of perspiration in the hot sun. A scattering of marbles and action figures lay near him, the remnants of his play, as if in testament to how quickly joy can be shattered. In front of him stood a man, older 50s or 60s, tall and broad in the shoulders, breathing heavily, fists clenched. A red flush crawled up his neck to his ruddy cheeks, his fury almost radiating as heat waves. His voice cracked the uneasy silence. "He touched my daughter's doll, and he wouldn't give it back. The punk was stealing." For half a second, there was only stunned disbelief. Onlookers grappled with the image, a grown white man looming over a young black boy who lay on the ground, chest heaving with pain. The boy's t-shirt was torn at the collar, and he clutched at his left arm in pain. His wide brown eyes were glossy with tears, his mouth parted as if trying desperately to draw in a breath. A few feet away stood the man's daughter, hair braided, her small hands clutching a doll to her chest, terror in her eyes. Her lips trembled as she looked from her father's rage to the boy who had fallen. That single moment crystallized a terrifying truth. Something deeply wrong had happened here, something no one in that pleasant, suburban park could possibly ignore. The scene was as disturbing as it was shocking, the contrast between the man's fury and the child's vulnerability painfully clear. Around them, bystanders encircled the confrontation, uncertain whether to intervene or simply gather the details. Yet it was all too clear from the unconscious hush that fell. They knew they were witnessing something more devastating than a squabble between strangers. The air felt heavy, thick with tension, as if the clouds above could burst at any second. It was in that hush that the boy's parents, Ebony and Johnson, arrived on the scene. Ebony had been searching for her son, Isaiah, after glancing away for only a moment to share a snack with near a group of friends. In those fleeting seconds, the unthinkable had happened. Her heart pounded so violently in her chest that she felt it thudding in her ears, drowning out rational thought. She saw Isaiah on the ground, saw the man standing over him with that vicious expression, and for a moment she could not breathe. "Isaiah," she cried out, her voice pitched high with maternal terror. She dropped to her knees, heedless of the grass stains that would mar her jeans. Her trembling hands hovered over her son's face, as if afraid that even the gentlest touch might cause him more pain. She saw the bruise already darkening along his cheek, saw the anguish written in his eyes. She tried to speak, to coax words out of her own mouth, but all she could manage was a croaked, "Oh my God, baby, are you okay?" Oleg arrived right behind her, shock turning swiftly to anger. He was a lean, tall man with hands roughened by years of steady work. His eyes, usually warm and affable, were now aflame with protective rage. "What in the hell did you do to my son?" he demanded, standing up to the man who was half a foot shorter but carried considerable heft. His voice shook with fury, his fists clenched and ready, every cell in his body poised to defend his family. The man people would learn his name was Richard Sutter, looked back at without a trace of guilt. He pointed to Isaiah. "He was stealing my daughter's doll. I told him to give it back, and he refused. So I taught him a lesson about messing with other people's property." Isaiah managed to hoist himself up onto one elbow. His breath was ragged, tears streaking his cheeks. "I wasn't stealing anything," he choked out. "She dropped the doll. I was just handing it back." Richard gave a harsh snort, glancing around as though seeking validation. "Sure looks like it in your hands, boy." "Watch how you talk to my son," hissed, raw anger dripping from each syllable. Ebony looked up from her trembling vigil at Isaiah's side, tears glossing her own eyes, her voice wavering between heartbreak and indignation. You hurt him because you assumed he was stealing." Richard's mouth twisted as if he'd tasted something rancid. His eyes flicked across the crowd. Some watchers were filming with their phones, others were whispering in hushed, urgent tones. He took half a step back, but his posture remained defiant, broad shoulders squared. Kids should just stay away from other people's property. Do you have any idea what you've done? Ebony demanded, her voice shaking as she stroked Isaiah's hair. Why does no one care that my daughter's doll was taken from her? Richard snapped, but there was an unsettling shrillness to his voice now, as if he recognized the precariousness of the situation. People were not giving him the benefit of the doubt. The entire gathering was fixated on the injustice, the obvious imbalance. A grown man had physically attacked a child. Someone in the crowd muttered, "She's holding the doll, so what's he talking about?" Another onlooker demanded, "Dude, you can't just go around hurting kids. What's the matter with you?" That tide of condemnation crested when Ebony gently helped Isaiah sit up. He winced, pressing a hand to his ribs. Loomed protectively, a swirl of emotions crossing his face. Sorrow, anger, heartbreak, confusion, but above all, fierce paternal love. It was in that moment that the weight of what had truly happened began to sink in for everyone. A violent assumption had been made, one drenched in prejudice and venom, and a defenseless child had paid the price. Before any further words could be exchanged, the shrill wail of sirens reached them from across the manicured lawns and quiet residential streets. The police had been called by one of the witnesses, and though it had only been minutes, it felt like an eternity for those at the scene. 2 squad cars pulled up alongside the park's curb, lights flashing red and blue, bathing the grass in an otherworldly glow. Officers emerged, hands on holsters, eyes scanning the scene. As they approached, the crowd murmured, parted, and pointed them to the center, where Ebony and huddled near Isaiah, and Richard hovered with tense shoulders a few feet away. One of the officers, whose nameplate read, stepped forward. He was middle-aged, with a neat mustache and an expression that attempted neutrality. "We got a call about a fight." He asked, scanning from Richard to Isaiah to Ebony, and "Not a fight," Ebony said, her voice thick with tears as she cradled Isaiah in her arms. "A man attacked my son." The other officer, a younger woman named Fisher, approached Richard, who was breathing hard. "Sir, could you tell us what happened?" she asked calmly. Richard seized on the formality of the question, voice hitching in fervor. "The kid, he grabbed my daughter's doll. He refused to give it back, so I restrained him." "Restrained him?" Ebony's words dripped with contempt. "You threw him to the ground. You could broken his arm." Officer Fisher's calm mask wavered just a fraction. The bystanders chimed in, each trying to talk over the other, describing the horrifying images they'd just seen. The officers glanced at each other, concern deepening as they realized the scale of the situation. They asked Ebony and to step aside momentarily to answer a few questions. At first, Ebony refused to let Isaiah go, but the paramedics had arrived by then, urging her gently so they could examine him. All at once, the seemingly peaceful suburban park turned into a swirl of chaos. People spoke in urgent tones to the police. Others gave accounts to paramedics and scribbled down statements. Isaiah was placed on a stretcher and examined for injuries to his arm, ribs, and cheek. Ebony hovered trembling, her eyes bright with tears, while answered the officer's questions with barely contained rage. Richard, in turn, looked uneasy as he offered his own twisted version of events. Many onlookers refused to let him shape the narrative unchallenged. In the midst of it all, Ebony felt as if reality was slipping through her fingers. The evening sun, once so warm and nurturing, now felt oppressive, casting long, warped shadows across the grass. The smell of hot asphalt and cut grass mingled uncomfortably with the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She wanted to be anywhere but here, yet she was stuck, forced to replay the incident over and over. Her son had simply been kind enough to pick up a doll and return it to a little girl. Then, in a heartbeat, violence had shattered that small act of kindness. Soon enough, the police took statements and, after conferring with each other, placed Richard under arrest for assault. His protests grew loud and frantic. "This is ridiculous. I was defending my child's property. You're arresting the wrong man." But the onlookers' videos and accounts aligned in condemning him. The younger officer, Fisher, read him his rights in a composed tone, though Ebony detected a flicker of anger or dismay in her eyes. The man was led away in handcuffs, face red, sputtering indignantly. His daughter stood off to the side with tears streaming down her cheeks, her mother, Richard's wife, having arrived late in the commotion. Ebony felt a pang of sympathy for the child, though not for the father. She knew that the pain her own son had experienced would not vanish easily, no matter the legal recourse. Isaiah was carefully helped onto a stretcher by the paramedics. The boy's breathing was coming in shallow gasps, the pain in his ribs radiating through his chest. Ebony followed him into the ambulance while locked the car and promised to follow right behind. The short ride to the hospital was punctuated by the beeping medical instruments and Ebony's soft pleas for Isaiah to stay strong, to keep breathing, to not be afraid. In the emergency room, doctors examined him for fractures. It turned out Isaiah had sustained a hairline fracture in his forearm, bruised ribs, and a large contusion on his cheek. The doctor was gentle but frank, explaining that though the boy would recover fully, the emotional trauma might take far longer to heal. Ebony nodded, not trusting her voice. She squeezed Isaiah's uninjured hand, tears slipping down her face. Who had arrived by then, stood over the bed, arms folded as though to contain the tempest of his emotions. When Ebony looked at him, she recognized the anguish in his eyes. He felt that he had failed to protect Isaiah, but she also saw an unspoken vow forming there. He would ensure such a thing never happened again. They did not get home until late into the night. Friends and relatives had gathered around the Johnson home, offering food, words of sympathy, and promises of support. Isaiah, exhausted and heavily medicated for pain, simply wanted to crawl into bed. Ebony tucked him in, heart heavy, wondering how the next day would go. She feared he would have nightmares, flashbacks of the man's towering figure and hateful expression. She feared that this incident would sow seeds of fear and distrust in a child who once believed the world to be fundamentally good. Had trouble sleeping that night, pacing the living room, occasionally glancing out the window, as though expecting something else to come crashing into their lives. The house was still, the hush broken only by a clock ticking in the kitchen. Around 2 in the morning, Ebony came out of the bedroom to find silently staring at the floor. She put a hand on his shoulder. He exhaled, ragged, and then wrapped his arms around her, holding on tight. They stood like that for a long time, sharing their sorrow, rage, and love. When they finally let go, Ebony guided him back to their room. They lay in bed, sleepless, haunted by the day's events, each hoping the other might find a few minutes of rest. Morning light spilled through the curtains far too soon. Ebony woke to find that Isaiah was still sleeping, his brow furrowed even in slumber. She made sure to check his bandaged arm. All the while, her phone buzzed incessantly with messages from concerned family and friends. The park incident had gone viral locally thanks to footage taken by bystanders. News outlets had begun to pick up on the story, calling it a clear instance of racially motivated violence. The headlines were enough to make Ebony's stomach churn. White man arrested after assaulting black child over alleged doll theft. Her mind reeled at how surreal it all felt. Yesterday they had simply gone to the park to enjoy the sunshine, and today they were at the center of a media storm. Fielded calls from a local reporter, while Ebony tried to figure out how best to talk to Isaiah once he woke. The reporter wanted a direct comment on whether they believed the assault was racially motivated. Standing in the hallway, his voice subdued yet firm, said, "I don't see how it could be anything else." The words hung in the air, resonating with the heartbreak and truth they carried. Isaiah was just a child, and Richard Sutter had singled him out, never bothering to ask a question or verify a single fact. When Isaiah finally emerged from his bedroom later that morning, Ebony noticed how he hesitated at the threshold, as though afraid the house might betray him. He stood with his left arm held gingerly in a sling, eyes still puffy from crying or lack of proper rest. The bruises on his cheek and arms looked darker in the morning light. The sight of her son so wounded made Ebony's chest ache with a hollow sadness. She reached out, trying to keep her voice steady. "Morning, honey. How are you feeling?" Isaiah shrugged, carefully avoiding direct eye contact. "Better, I guess," he murmured, though he winced when he moved his shoulders. He seemed more guarded than usual, as if the childhood innocence he once carried had taken a direct blow. I had nightmares." Ebony's heart clenched. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry. Do you want to talk about them?" She tried to keep her tone neutral. She didn't want to push him, but she also didn't want him to bottle it up. He looked away, hugging his good arm around himself. "It's just he was there in the park, chasing me, calling me." He trailed off, and Ebony understood. She took a step forward, enveloping him in a gentle hug. Isaiah stiffened initially, but then let himself melt into his mother's arms, face pressed against her shoulder. who had been standing quietly by the kitchen door, approached and placed a hand on Isaiah's back. The boy's small frame shook with suppressed sobs. They spent the morning in an uneasy bubble of comfort and fear. Ebony made breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast, and orange juice, a simple meal, and coaxed Isaiah into eating a few bites. Talked in hushed tones with Ebony about the next steps. There was already talk from local advocacy groups who wanted to support the Johnson family if they decided to pursue legal action. The police report had clearly labeled the incident as an assault, possibly even a hate crime, though Ebony shuddered at the label. It was so stark, so ugly, like an open wound in the fabric of their daily lives. The day slowly progressed, the phone calls continued, and Ebony tried to maintain as much normalcy as possible for Isaiah's sake. They set up an appointment with a therapist recommended by a family friend, hoping it would help Isaiah process what had happened. Meanwhile, Ebony found herself answering question after question from relatives, from acquaintances, even from strangers in the community who had seen the viral video. Some called to offer moral support, others expressed indignation or asked how they could help. But there were also the trolls, the hateful comments online that dismissed Isaiah's pain or outright the role of racism. Ebony read too many vile messages before gently the phone from her hand. He scrolled through a few comments, shaking his head. "Can't believe people can be so cruel," he muttered, lips pressed in a tight line. He set the phone aside, reaching for Ebony's hand. "They don't know our son. They don't know what really happened." Ebony drew in a shuddering breath. "It's just words on a screen, right? But it's like it's stabbing me in the heart. And Isaiah, my God, if he sees these." She couldn't finish the sentence. She didn't want Isaiah to internalize the ugliness people were spewing. She feared that negativity would reinforce the trauma, that it would whisper sinister lies in his ear. "You deserved it. You don't matter. You're the one at fault." She vowed that they would shield him from that as best as they could. Isaiah spent most of the day curled up on the living room couch, playing a handheld game or dozing off under the influence of his pain medication. Late in the afternoon, Ebony heard a gentle knock on the door. She opened it to find a tall, elegant woman with impeccable posture, wearing a light summer dress. Her name was a local community leader and family friend. She had heard about the incident and come by to offer support. Ebony let her in, tears brimming again as she recounted the trauma. Listened intently, her eyes gentle but determined. "I'm working with a few local organizations," said. "We've been seeing this kind of thing happen more frequently around the country, but rarely do we catch it on tape so clearly." She sighed, frustration evident. "And now we have your situation. Look, Ebony, if you decide to take legal action beyond what the police do, if you need help dealing with the media, if you want to press for hate crime charges, let me know. My group can provide resources, an attorney, that kind of thing." Ebony swallowed hard. "I just want to protect my child," she said softly. "I don't want him to be a headline forever." Oleg placed a hand gently on Ebony's shoulder. "I understand. Take the time you need to process this, to help Isaiah heal, but know that you have community support if you need it." They spoke at length, discussing potential options and next steps. By the time left, Ebony felt both reassured and overwhelmed. The reality of the situation was that their personal tragedy had become a public talking point. She worried that Isaiah's name would be flung around by strangers, or used as a rallying cry or political weapon. As a mother, all she wanted was for her child to be safe, to be free from nightmares, to never again experience the terror of a stranger's hatred. Joined her in the living room, placing a comforting hand on her back. She glanced over at Isaiah, who had dozed off again. She spoke quietly, her voice taut with emotion. "Do we do it? Do we go all the way with pressing charges, seeing this through as a hate crime?" He let out a long breath. "I never wanted to have to make this choice. But if we don't, it's like we're telling Isaiah and every kid out there that it's okay for grown men to do this." I won't stand for that." Ebony nodded, tears in her eyes. "Me neither. But I also don't want to add to his trauma by dragging him through a long public trial. You know how these things can become." Some defense attorney making it seem like Isaiah asked for it, or that it was some misunderstanding. She shuddered at the thought, looked at their son with an expression so tender it nearly broke Ebony's heart. "We'll talk to him when he's ready. We'll move at his pace, see what a therapist advises. But Ebony, we can't let that man walk away from what he did. We just can't." They sat in silence for a moment, side by side on the couch. The hush of the house felt oppressive. Outside, the sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in soft purples and oranges. It was still beautiful, Ebony noted distantly, as though nature had no idea of the ugliness that had erupted beneath its watchful eye. That night after dinner, Ebony and gently approached Isaiah about seeing a therapist. The boy shrugged, eyes averted. I guess so. Is that like, are people going to think I'm crazy? His voice was small, uncertain. No, honey, Ebony assured him, smoothing a hand over his hair. Therapy's just a place where you can talk to someone who's trained to help you work through your feelings. It's safe to say anything there. Isaiah stared at the floor, biting his lip. Do you think I did something wrong? His heart lurched. He knelt so he was at Isaiah's eye level. No, absolutely not, he said, gently gripping his son's uninjured hand. You did nothing wrong, Isaiah. You helped someone and he attacked you. None of this is your fault, okay? Isaiah nodded, but his eyes were watery, and he pressed his lips together as though trying to block out the memory. Ebony wrapped her arms around him, tears pricking her own eyes. We love you so much, baby. You're going to be okay, I promise. They spent the rest of the evening trying to distract Isaiah with a board game, flipping channels on the TV, and ensuring he took his medication. Had to quell his own simmering anger every time he caught sight of the bruise on Isaiah's face or the sling around his arm. That night, Ebony let Isaiah sleep in the bed with them. The boy, though he tried to act mature about the situation, clung to her arm, terrified to be alone, stayed on the other side, forming a protective cocoon around his son. The darkness pressed in, and Ebony silently prayed for peace, for healing, for the next day to bring hope. In the days that followed, they found themselves navigating a whirlwind of developments. The local news station requested an on-camera interview, hesitated, unsure if they should continue fueling the media frenzy, but Ebony suggested that this might be a way to let the community know what happened directly from them, instead of letting rumors swirl. Eventually, they agreed to a short interview, carefully making sure Isaiah wouldn't have to appear on camera if he didn't want to. When the reporter, a sympathetic woman named, arrived at their home, Ebony guided her to the living room. Isaiah stayed in his bedroom, door slightly ajar, just within earshot but out of sight, and Ebony sat side by side on the couch, Ebony's hands folded in her lap to keep them from shaking. Maintained a protective arm around her shoulders, began with a soft, empathetic tone. First, I want to thank you for letting me come here. I understand how difficult this is, and I appreciate your trust. Can you tell me how Isaiah is doing now? Ebony let out a shaky exhale. He's recovering physically. The fractures, the bruises, they'll heal with time. But emotionally, she paused, glancing at for support. He cleared his throat. He's scared, confused. He doesn't understand why this happened, and frankly, neither do we. Nodded, setting aside her notes. The footage that circulated online shows a very upsetting scene. Can you walk us through what you know about what happened in the park that day? His jaw tensed, but he kept his voice level. Isaiah was playing with some marbles, some toys. He saw this little girl drop a doll and went to pick it up. The next thing we know, that man, Richard Sutter, accuses Isaiah of stealing and attacks him. Ebony's composure cracked as she recalled the moment she saw Isaiah on the ground. We heard the scream. We rushed over. He was just lying there in pain. That man stood over him, saying Isaiah was a punk kid who needed to learn a lesson. A flash of sadness and outrage crossed his face. Has Isaiah said much about it, about what he felt or heard while it was happening? Ebony shook her head, pressing trembling fingers to her lips. He's not ready to open up about every detail yet. He's just a kid. What do you hope comes from all this? Asked gently. His voice took on a deep, resolute timbre. We want justice. For Isaiah, for our community. We don't want him to live in fear. And we want people to understand that assumptions based on skin color can have devastating consequences. Ebony forced herself to add, we're looking into legal options. But mostly, we just want our son to be able to be a kid again. Nodded, expression earnest. Thank you for sharing. I'm so sorry this happened to your family. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up? Ebony looked then at the partially open door where Isaiah might be listening. I want everyone watching to remember that Isaiah is not just some story. He's our son. He's a smart, loving, funny boy who did nothing to deserve this. With that, the interview concluded, thanked them and left, promising to frame the story respectfully and sensitively. As soon as the door closed, Ebony slumped back against the couch. took her hand, squeezing it in silent solidarity. They had taken a step into a very public arena, a step they couldn't easily retract. They only hoped it was the right thing for their family. Meanwhile, Isaiah had quietly listened from behind his bedroom door, his heart pounding at every word. A part of him felt relief that his parents were standing up for him, speaking the truth. Another part felt an ache deep in his chest, an ache rooted in fear and shame that kept resurfacing every time he thought about that man's angry face and harsh words. Therapy sessions began the following week. The therapist, Dr. was a warm, middle-aged woman with a gentle demeanor. Her office was soothing, with soft lighting and shelves filled with colorful books and toys. Isaiah sat on a plush chair, sling resting across his chest, while Ebony sat on a small couch to the side. Doctor explained that they would try to help Isaiah unpack the trauma in a safe space. At first, Isaiah didn't want to talk. He would shrug, stare at the floor, or answer in monosyllables. Doctor didn't push him. Instead, she offered him drawing paper and crayons, saying he could sketch his feelings if that was easier. Slowly, over the course of several sessions, Isaiah opened up. He drew dark shapes that represented his nightmares, swirling shapes that felt suffocating. One day he drew a towering figure overshadowing a small figure, capturing the imbalance of power he felt in that moment. Doctor guided him gently, helping him name his emotions: fear, sadness, anger, confusion. She encouraged him to process what had happened without blame or guilt. She also spent time talking to Ebony and emphasizing that they should reassure Isaiah that they believed him, that the incident wasn't his fault, and that it was okay for him to feel whatever he needed to feel. The legal proceedings moved forward in parallel. Richard Sutter was arraigned on assault charges. His lawyers attempted to downplay the racial component, framing it as a simple matter of property defense gone wrong. Ebony felt a surge of outrage every time she read a statement implying that Richard had only been trying to protect his daughter, as if that somehow excused attacking a child. Tension mounted when the district attorney suggested adding a hate crime enhancement based on multiple witness accounts and Sutter's recorded comments, which some bystanders had partially captured on video. In those heated moments, his venomous words about Isaiah being one of those kinds of kids and calling him a troublemaking thief carried a clear undercurrent of racial bias. The news coverage continued, swirling debates about race, violence, and the safety of children. The Johnsons found themselves at the center of a community discussion about prejudice. They received floods of messages. Some supportive, some cruel. Local politicians weighed in, with some calling for restraint and understanding, while others advocated for the harshest possible punishment. The constant noise outside their home made Ebony wish she could close the curtains to the world forever. Yet she remained strong for Isaiah, determined to see this through. One afternoon, Ebony received a call from an unfamiliar number. She almost didn't pick up, but something compelled her to answer. On the other line was a woman with a soft, trembling voice. "Mrs. Johnson?" she asked hesitantly. "Yes, this is her," Ebony answered. "My name is Jennifer Sutter," the woman said, voice wavering. Richard is my husband. Please don't hang up. She paused, seemingly fighting for composure. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what he did." Oh. Ebony's breath caught in her throat. She closed her eyes, trying to keep her pulse steady. "Mrs. Sutter, she wasn't sure how to respond. She wanted to scream, to cry, to demand answers. Yet she also felt a flicker of empathy for this woman who was likely caught in a hurricane she never anticipated. Jennifer continued, words tumbling in a rush. "I know nothing I say can change what happened or erase Isaiah's pain. This isn't the man I thought I married. He's always had a temper, yes, but I never imagined he would hurt a child, or that it would be a racially charged attack. She let out a shuddering breath. "I hate what he's done to your family." Ebony forced herself to maintain composure. She glanced over to where Isaiah was reading on the couch, oblivious to the conversation. In a low voice, she responded, your husband broke my son's arm. He terrorized him." "I know," Jennifer whispered. Ebony could hear her trying not to cry on the other end. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I needed you to know that I'm not going to stand by him if he tries to justify his actions. I told him that, and another pause. He's done damage that can't be undone. I'm prepared to take my daughter and leave him if that's what it comes to. I can't let my child grow up thinking any of that was acceptable." Ebony found herself feeling momentarily disarmed. She thought of the little girl clutching her doll in the park, trembling with confusion. "I'm glad to hear that," she managed. "I don't wish any harm on your daughter. She's innocent in all of this." They spoke for a few more minutes, the conversation tinged with painful honesty. Jennifer apologized again, promised to cooperate if there was anything she could do to help clarify the truth, and then hung up. Ebony stood there for a moment in the quiet hallway, feeling an odd mixture of relief, sadness, and lingering anger. She told about it later, but they both decided to keep the call from Isaiah for now. He didn't need to be burdened with the complexities of Richard Sutter's family dynamic. As time inched forward, Isaiah's physical wounds began to heal. The bruises faded, the cast was eventually replaced by a removable brace, and though his cheekbone remained a little tender, the swelling subsided. He resumed some of his normal childhood activities, though cautiously. Ebony noticed that he seemed more guarded around strangers now, especially white men. If someone new entered a room, Isaiah would subtly move closer to Ebony, or as if seeking an anchor. It broke their hearts, but they understood. Trauma had a long, relentless tail, and they were only at the beginning of its arc, the family's support network around them. Neighbors dropped off meals, people from church sent them handwritten letters of encouragement, and Ebony's sister flew in from out of state to spend a week offering extra help. Friends came by with games and art supplies for Isaiah. The boy tried to appear polite and grateful, but Ebony could see a certain hollowness in his eyes at times. She knew that no stack of gifts could erase the memory of those terrifying minutes in the park. Summer was drawing to a close, and with autumn approaching, Isaiah faced the reality of returning to school. Ebony worried about how other kids would treat him, whether they had heard the news, whether he'd face teasing or awkward stares. The local press had run with the story for weeks, and it was likely that many families in town were aware of it. Yet Ebony decided not to shelter Isaiah from this inevitability. They discussed it openly, reminding him that it was okay to ask for help if he felt overwhelmed. They arranged a meeting with his school principal and counselor, ensuring that the staff was prepared to support him as he transitioned back. On his first day of the new school year, Ebony walked him to the school's entrance. Isaiah clutched his backpack straps, the sling gone but his wrist still sporting a supportive brace. He looked up at them, hesitant. "What if people stare?" he asked quietly. Crouched down to Isaiah's level, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "Then you hold your head high. You remember that you're strong, that you overcame something really terrible. And you remember that your mom and dad have your back, always." Ebony bent down and pressed a kiss to Isaiah's temple. "You're brave, baby. Don't ever forget that." She tried to hide her own anxiety, not wanting to project it onto him. Isaiah nodded, swallowing. Then he took a deep breath and walked through the school's doors, shoulders squared. Ebony watched him disappear into the hallway, hearts pounding, praying that the day would go smoothly. To their relief, it seemed that the teachers had prepared the class. The principal had spoken to the students about kindness and empathy. A few classmates approached Isaiah with careful curiosity, asking if his arm was better, offering him a seat at their lunch table. Some kids inevitably wanted to know every detail of the attack, as they called it, but Isaiah's teacher intervened, redirecting them with gentle reminders to respect Isaiah's privacy. By the time school let out, Ebony found Isaiah in relatively good spirits. He admitted that it was weird and awkward, but it hadn't been as awful as he'd feared. Still, the nights were the hardest. Isaiah's nightmares persisted, though less frequently than before. He woke in cold sweats, trembling, sometimes calling out for his parents. They took turns comforting him, reminding him he was safe. Therapy continued, and Dr. introduced breathing exercises and visualization techniques to help him cope with anxiety. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Isaiah began to smile and laugh again, moments that Ebony treasured like priceless gems. Meanwhile, the legal case against Richard Sutter trudged along. There were preliminary hearings, motions, statements, delays, typical in the criminal justice process. The prosecution insisted on framing it as a racially motivated crime. Sutter's defense lawyers, in turn, did everything in their power to discredit that angle, claiming that Sutter's actions were simply an overreaction by an overprotective father. Nevertheless, the witness statements and video evidence were damaging. Sutter's face contorted in anger, his words spat with an alarming tone, left little room for interpretation. The trial date was finally set for mid-fall. Ebony dreaded it, knowing Isaiah might have to testify or at least provide a statement. Their lawyer, a kind yet fierce advocate named Wu, prepared them for the possibility of cross-examination. She explained that in a case like this, the defense might try to poke holes in Isaiah's memory or painting the event as a misunderstanding. Ebony felt sick at the thought of her child being grilled on a witness stand by strangers who wanted to undermine his experience. The day of the trial arrived with unseasonably cold weather. Gray clouds blanketed the sky, a cold wind rustling the dried leaves that had begun to carpet the sidewalks. Ebony dressed Isaiah in neat, comfortable clothes, making sure he had everything he needed. Wore a suit a tie clumsily knotted, lines of tension etched into his face. They drove to the courthouse in near silence, Ebony's stomach churning with nerves. Outside the courthouse, a small group of protesters had gathered, some supporting Isaiah and calling for justice, others bizarrely defending Sutter's actions under the banner of parental rights or even anti-woke sentiments. The latter carried signs with slogans Ebony could barely stomach, referencing false accusations and innocent families destroyed by the race card. Gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. Ebony placed a hand on his arm, silently urging restraint. Once inside, they were guided by a court clerk to a waiting area outside the courtroom. They could hear a dull murmur of voices, footsteps echoing down the polished corridors. Their lawyer arrived, offering reassuring smiles, though Ebony could see concern in her eyes. "We're going to do everything we can to make this as painless for Isaiah as possible," promised. The trial began with opening statements. The prosecution described the incident in stark terms, laying out how a grown man had violently assaulted a child based on nothing more than an assumption, and how that assumption was rooted in prejudice. The defense countered, painting Sutter as a loving father who had overreacted in a moment of panic, claiming he believed his daughter was being bullied or robbed. Ebony felt her blood boil at the blatant distortions, but she kept her composure for Isaiah's sake. Witness after witness took the stand, park-goers who had seen the assault, paramedics who had treated Isaiah, even the responding officers. Videos recorded on phones were played for the jury, blurry at times, but clear enough to show Isaiah on the ground, Sutter looming above him, shouting. Ebony found it agonizing to watch those seconds repeated over and over. She saw her son's small figure again, recalled the anguished cry. She squeezed his hand, leaning on his steady presence to keep herself together. When it came time for Isaiah to speak, the prosecution arranged for a smaller, more private hearing space, hoping to minimize his distress. Ebony was allowed to sit nearby, offering silent support as the lawyers asked him questions. He spoke softly, voice trembling at first, describing how he found the doll, how he tried to hand it back, and how he was suddenly thrown to the ground. He had tears in his eyes, but he held steady. Ebony's heart nearly burst with pride at her son's courage. The defense approached. Their attorney tried to lead Isaiah into suggesting that maybe he had held onto the doll too long, or that the daughter had yelled for her father because she felt threatened. Each question felt like a barb in Ebony's flesh. Isaiah shook his head, voice quiet but firm. "I didn't keep her doll, I was just giving it back." His statement was simple, honest, and unyielding. Even the defense attorney seemed at a loss, eventually retreating without having made much headway. Richard Sutter took the stand in his own defense. He began with contrition, saying he was sorry the child got hurt, but he still insisted that he felt threatened, that he saw a bigger kid taking his daughter's possession. When pressed by the prosecution, he grew flustered, revealing glimpses of that anger the cameras had captured. He stumbled over his own statements, and the racial bias, though unspoken, seeped through in his tone and choice of words, words that implied Isaiah had no business being near his daughter, no right to handle her belongings. After days of emotional testimony, the closing arguments arrived. The prosecution emphasized that Sutter had acted out of an unfounded, racist assumption, assaulting a child in a public space. The defense argued that the incident was a tragic misunderstanding, an unfortunate escalation of paternal concern. The jury deliberated. Ebony tried to keep Isaiah's spirits up in the waiting area, joking lightly about other matters, but the tension weighed on them all. Finally, the verdict came in. Sutter was found guilty of assault and battery. The hate crime enhancement, which required proving explicit racial motivation, was more contentious. However, after carefully considering the evidence, the jury determined that prejudice had been a significant factor. That additional layer meant Sutter faced stricter sentencing. A wave of relief and vindication spread through the Johnson family, though Ebony felt no triumph. How could one truly celebrate when their child had been so hurt? She only felt a quiet gratitude that the system had recognized the truth, that Isaiah's voice had not been dismissed or minimized. Richard Sutter was remanded into custody, facing prison time. As he was led away, Ebony caught a glimpse of Jennifer Sutter sitting in the gallery, tears streaking her face. Their eyes met for a fleeting second. Jennifer gave a slight nod, as if to say, "I'm sorry." Again, Ebony turned away, taking Isaiah's hand, guiding him out of the courtroom. Outside, the crisp autumn air slapped their faces. Reporters clamored for statements. Ebony and politely declined, stating they needed time to heal. They shielded Isaiah from the camera flashes, ushering him to the car. The swirling wind carried fallen leaves across the courthouse steps, a reminder that the seasons were changing, that life continued onward even after such a monumental event. In the days that followed, Ebony and focused on reclaiming a sense of normalcy. The media attention gradually subsided. Sutter's sentencing hearing took place a few weeks later. Ebony chose not to attend, feeling that they had done their part by testifying. Reports indicated he received a multi-year sentence, with the judge emphasizing the gravity of assaulting a minor and the hateful underpinnings of the act. Some in the community felt the punishment was too harsh, others thought it wasn't harsh enough. Ebony decided to let them debate. She had no space in her heart for the noise anymore. What truly mattered now was Isaiah's future. With the trial behind them, Ebony noticed a subtle lightness returning to her son's demeanor. He still had hard nights, still occasionally jumped at sudden noises or grew uneasy around new adults, but he was laughing more. He went back to drawing, playing outside with his friends, losing himself in imaginative stories about superheroes and far-off worlds. In therapy, Doctor remarked on his resilience, praising the support of his parents and the community. One bright afternoon, the Johnsons decided to return to the park where the incident took place. It had been months since they'd set foot there. Ebony's heart fluttered with anxiety as they parked the car, but Isaiah, who was sitting in the back seat, insisted. "I want to go back," he said quietly. "It can't scare me forever." They walked across the grass, leaves crunching underfoot. The swing set still stood, rusted chains creaking in the breeze. The old wooden bench was there, and Ebony paused, recalling how she'd found Isaiah lying on the ground nearby. Her stomach tightened with the memory, but she looked down at her son, who was staring at the same patch of grass, expression contemplative but calm. He reached out for her hand, and she squeezed it gently, put a supportive hand on Isaiah's shoulder. "You okay, bud?" Isaiah looked around, taking in the blue sky, the trees with leaves turning shades of gold and red. He nodded, his voice steady. "Yeah, I'm okay. I just wanted to see it. It looks smaller than I remember." Ebony knelt, meeting his gaze. "That's because you're braver now," she said softly. "And sometimes, facing scary things makes them smaller." Oh. Isaiah's lips curved into a small smile. He turned, walking toward the swing set. Ebony followed. Together, they sat on the swings, the chains squeaking as they gently pushed off the ground. The afternoon sun danced through the canopy of leaves, casting dappled shadows on the grass. A breeze carried the scent of earth and distant chimney smoke from someone's fireplace. It was peaceful in that moment, almost like a reclaiming of lost territory. Ebony's mind drifted to the larger lessons of the past few months. Hate, assumptions, and violence had struck at the heart of her family. The road to healing had been arduous, but they had found strength in each other, and in the unwavering support of a community that refused to let injustice stand unchallenged. She squeezed Isaiah's shoulder, looking into his eyes, which now shone with a quiet strength. He had endured something terrible, but he had come out the other side with a deeper understanding of the world and of himself. "Mom," Isaiah said softly, idly scuffing his shoe in the dirt, "remember when I told you I had nightmares?" Ebony nodded, bracing herself for what might come next. "Yes, I remember." He shifted on the swing, then looked up. "They're not as bad now. Sometimes I still see him, but then I remember that he can't hurt me anymore, and I feel safe." Ebony's heart flooded with gratitude. She reached over, stroking his hair gently. "I'm so glad, baby, so glad." Hopped off his swing, smoothing the wrinkles from his jeans. He watched them for a moment, eyes warm. "How about some ice cream on the way home?" He suggested, a subtle grin playing on his lips. Isaiah's face lit up, the shadows of the past weeks momentarily forgotten. "Yes, please," he exclaimed, pushing off the swing to land with a solid thump. Ebony and both laughed softly. It was a small, ordinary joy, and yet it felt monumental, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. They walked back to the car together. As they reached the edge of the park, Ebony glanced back one more time at the bench, the swings, the patch of grass. A swirl of emotions coursed through her: pain, relief, determination. But in the end, she turned away, following her family across the grass. She chose not to let the memory of violence claim that space forever. There were still memories of picnics, of children laughing, of friendly neighbors chatting under leafy trees. The park belonged to them all, and hate had no right to steal that away. The three of them piled into the car, Ebony settling in the passenger seat while started the engine. The late afternoon sunlight gilded the rooftops and sidewalks as they drove through their neighborhood. The vibrancy of autumn leaves reminded Ebony that the world was still full of color and change. Nothing remained static, not even pain. At a stoplight, she caught Isaiah looking out the window, a thoughtful expression on his face. "It's going to be okay," she said quietly, unsure if he needed the reassurance or if she did. Isaiah turned and nodded, a slight smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah, I think so." Reached over and squeezed Ebony's hand. "We made it through," he murmured, his gaze on the road, but his voice thick with emotion. They pulled into a small ice cream shop, the bright neon sign buzzing softly in the dusk. As they stepped inside, the air smelled of sugar and waffle cones, and Ebony felt a wave of contentment. It was such a simple human pleasure, choosing a flavor, tasting the sweet coldness, indulging in a moment of peace with loved ones. For a while, they chatted about everyday things. Favorite candies, upcoming school projects, Halloween costumes. The laughter and closeness wrapped around them like a protective cloak, reminding them that life, though fragile, was still full of warmth and promise. Later that night, back home, Isaiah climbed into his bed without hesitation. Ebony stood in the doorway, part of her anxious that he might still need them in the middle of the night, but Isaiah gave her a tired, reassuring smile. "I'm good, Mom," he said softly. "I'll call you if I need you." She approached, bent down, and kissed his forehead. "I love you," she whispered, "always." He closed his eyes, breathing evenly. "Love you too." She switched off his light and made her way to the living room, where was waiting. They curled up on the couch, the muted glow of a lamp casting soft shadows on the walls. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, carrying the gentle hush of a world settling down for the night. For the first time in weeks, Ebony felt a semblance of calm wash over her, stroked her hand, his voice low. "We did the right thing, standing up in court, speaking out." Ebony exhaled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "We did, for Isaiah and for ourselves." She paused, reflecting on the storm they had weathered, the sleepless nights, the tears, the anger. "I never want him to doubt his worth, to doubt that he matters." Pressed his lips to her temple. "He won't, not if we can help it." They sat in companionable silence, letting the day's events settle into memory. A sort of fatigued relief spread through them. This was the quiet aftermath of the battle, where healing could finally take root. They both knew that what happened to Isaiah would always be part of his story, part of their family's story. But it would not define them. Rather, it would stand as evidence of their resilience, of how they could face down hate and emerge stronger. The weeks rolled on, each day bringing a bit more distance from the pain. Isaiah continued therapy sessions, but needed them less frequently. The boy's genuine smile began to appear more often, lighting his face with that easy joy Ebony had once feared lost. Family gatherings became a time of laughter and shared memories, no longer overshadowed by the constant retelling of the assault. Even the park, once a place of horror, returned to a place of cautious but hopeful recreation. One evening, a knock on the door revealed the community leader who had offered her support early on. She came bearing a plaque with Isaiah's name engraved, along with the words, "In recognition of courage." Her organization wanted to honor him at a small ceremony. At first, Ebony worried about thrusting Isaiah into the spotlight again, but the boy seemed intrigued. "What does it mean?" he asked, lightly tracing his fingers over the engraved letters. Smiled. "It means your bravery helped bring attention to something very wrong, and you spoke out to make our community better. We just want to say thank you." Isaiah looked at his parents, then his voice was quiet. "Okay, I'll come." The ceremony took place at a local community center, not far from the park. The crowd was modest. Neighbors, friends, teachers, a few local officials, and some families who had followed Isaiah's story. On a simple stage, Ebony stood behind their son, hands on his shoulders, while presented him with the plaque. Applause filled the room, warm and appreciative, as Isaiah flashed a shy grin, looking out at the people who had stood by him. Stepping up to the microphone, Ebony felt a slight tremble in her voice, but she spoke from her heart. Thank you all for being here, for supporting our family when we needed it most. I don't have a speech prepared, but I do want to say that what happened to Isaiah shouldn't have happened to any child. We're grateful for the justice we've seen, but more than that, we hope no other child will have to endure such pain. She glanced down at Isaiah, who looked back with wide eyes. Isaiah is strong, and I know he'll continue to grow into a wonderful young man. Added softly, and we stand with every child who's ever been hurt by hate or misunderstanding. We can do better, all of us. Thank you. The applause was heartfelt. Then people mingled, sharing stories, offering congratulations to Isaiah and thanks to the Johnsons. One by one, strangers approached, saying how Isaiah's courage had inspired them, how the family's perseverance reminded them that standing up for what's right matters. Ebony felt tears gathering, but for once they weren't tears of sorrow, they were tears of gratitude and hope. The rest of the evening passed in a swirl of kind words, supportive smiles, and a rare sense of communal harmony. By the end of it, Isaiah was yawning, the plaque clutched under his arm, carried him to the car, Ebony trailing behind, shaking hands with the last few well-wishers. The drive home was quiet, the glow of streetlights passing in a rhythmic pattern that lulled Isaiah to sleep in the back seat. When they arrived, gently carried him inside and tucked him into bed. Ebony stood in the hallway, looking in on her son, who was now so peacefully at rest. She thought of the terror in his eyes that day in the park, and she marveled at how far they'd come. Yet in her mind, she knew the journey toward complete healing was ongoing. But they had each other, and in that togetherness, there was a strength that no assailant could break, no ignorance could diminish. She ended the night once again side by side on the couch, hands entwined. He turned to her with a small smile. I think our boy's going to be just fine. Ebony nodded, resting her head on his shoulder. I believe so too. She let her eyes drift closed, recalling the swirl of autumn leaves in the park, the sound of Isaiah's laughter at the ice cream shop, and the unbreakable bond that had guided them through the storm. If the world sometimes seemed dark, she mused, it was moments like these, moments of unity, of healing, that lit a path forward. And that path, she realized, was theirs to walk, one step at a time, guided by hope, grounded in love, and strengthened by the knowledge that they had survived the worst and emerged, hearts still beating, ready to embrace the future. Outside, the wind carried the promise of a new season. Inside the Johnson home, a family rested in the comforting knowledge that their love had endured a painful trial. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more joy, and more growth, but for tonight, they allowed themselves the solace of a well-earned peace, knowing that no matter what storms lay ahead, they would face them together, unafraid and unbroken.